Good to go.
Are we live?
Yep.
All right, thank you. So we're going to call the meeting to order. As soon as we get.
Do we have a quorum?
And who do we have on?
Actually, you're right. No, you have 4 members, so you have a quorum.
All right.
Is that including the phone number we don't know?
You would just need 4 members, I believe.
Maybe each person could identify him or herself, just for the sake of quiet. That way, when you write the minutes, you'll know who's here.
Well, yes, but I meant in terms of quorum, there's you 3 and at least Jen. So I don't know who the member of the public, so the members of the public can certainly identify.
Hey, Max, I'm here. I can't see myself on screen, but I just wanted to know that you guys can hear me.
We can hear you.
All right.
Who is?
That's John.
John, that was John.
Oh, I see. So that phone number,
And Jen is on, is that right?
how come he has too many digits in his phone number?
Maybe he had to dial one to get out. Maybe he's at his office or something like that. All right, so we're going to call the meeting to order. We did get the minutes issued. Thanks, Max. Did everyone have a chance to review those?
Yes.
I did. John and Jen, did you get a chance to review the minutes?
No, I didn't.
John, did you?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great. Any questions on anything in there?
No.
All right, can we have a motion to accept the minutes?
Move to accept.
Second,
All right, all in favor? Perfect. So those are passed as written. I'm gonna take this off because they were pretty,
Over here. Yep.
can't even talk through that thing. I don't have a lot on the on my report, just that like I did last week, we're into the final week of Great Art for Great Reads, which is the library auction at biddingowl.com. There's Facebook posts that will take you right to the auction, or you can get right to the auction from the Waldeboro Public Library website, or you can go right to biddingowl.com, and all the auctions are alphabetical. So you got to scroll almost to the bottom to Waldeboro Public Library, and you'll see all the wonderful art that's being auctioned off. We do need to try to generate some excitement this week because we still have about 30 pieces of art that haven't received a bid yet. And this auction is so important to the library, and it's our one fundraiser of the year. So we're really hoping folks will step up and look at some of the great art that needs to get bids.
Is it local artists as a category or anybody?
It's anybody, but all the artists are pretty much local. They're, there's some from Portland, they're all Maine artists,
Yeah.
and majority from this area. But there's just some really, really nice stuff that hasn't got a bid yet. That kind of surprises me. But so hopefully people will log on and have a look at that.
No one should think it's your grandchild's drawing of a turkey.
It is not. They're, artists like Michael Vermette. We got some high-end art that in a gallery would sell for thousands of dollars. And here you have a chance to pick it up for hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, that seems worth mentioning specifically.
Yep. Max, that takes us to the town update. Do you want to kind of talk about AD Gray maybe a little bit?
Hey, Julie, do you want to talk about EDI Gray?
Sure. So we received word from Volunteers of America that structural report performed on the building, and that
You're cutting in and out. This is not good.
Yeah, we're losing you there, Julie.
Bob, do you want to take over just while
actual structure that would have to be performed.
Yeah,
And although that,
Hey, Julie, we missed that
Yes.
last minute. You cut out on us.
as you have again.
As you have again.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I was driving around the building. So a structural report came back and it said that the brick facade is not attached to the building. There are vapor barrier issues and also issues with some of the structural members would have to be shored up for the use of the building. So to give you an idea of what the facade not being attached to the building, if that were to fail, what you saw in Wiscasset on Main Street where the bricks came off the peeled away from the building, that could happen. So their architect, not their structural engineer, but their architect has basically said that it's not economically feasible to make the repairs to the facade and the other things that might need to be done in order to preserve the building and renovate it. It would be much more economically feasible for them to demolish the building and start from scratch. Of course, that is not what the public voted upon.
Right.
So that news was presented to the select board at the last select board's meeting, and it is on the agenda for the next select board meeting also, to have some more conversation about that. Of course, it will have to go back before the voters, but I think select board needed some time to digest that information. And that's where we are. And moving forward, that's what the select board has to decide what they would like to do, how they would like to proceed. There is the brownfields. They did authorize Max and I to proceed with a brownfields grant that would pay for the removal of the building. And again, pending what the voters say, we can always reject that grant if we're successful getting it.
Would it be correct to say that that engineering analysis precludes other future uses for that structure as it is?
Well, I think it depends how deep your pockets are.
Well, but if you have to
know-
reattach the brick facade, that's a lot.
And that's part of it is, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but originally I believe it was an $8 million investment they were going to make into that building.
That's the number
So-
I heard.
Obviously, it's more than an $8 million investment, which was out of their range. So is there somebody else out there who might want to, invest 12 billion? I don't know. We wouldn't know that without an RFP, but for them, if that's the project that is proceeded with BOA, their druthers would definitely be to tear the building down and start from scratch and recreate a building reminiscent of 80 Gray and use some of the architectural pieces of the building in a new building.
So they still want to do the project there, but they're looking at it with a tear down to begin with. And that's still
Correct.
falls within their original budget,
Yes.
but it's not what the town voted for.
But
Yeah,
it is not what the town voted for.
I think they're assuming that because of their knowledge of grants, that they would be able to get a grant to defray the cost of demolition and removal.
Right. So, all right, well, but it does sound like if somebody had another use for it that didn't get it torn down, it sounds like there'd be some probably permitting problems with that too. I mean, if the skin's about to fall off, I don't think they're going to want anybody near it.
Well, it's complicated, it's a very complicated, and if you are going to go out to RFP, all proposals should be held to the same standard. I think that's important moving forward. If we don't go through with this project and there's going to be something else there, it is imperative and key that every project that's presented holds true to a standard set of parameters established in an RFP. I think that will eliminate a lot of competing projects of saying, well, this is what we're doing and that's what we're doing. Now you can then compare apples to apples, and you're not comparing apples to oranges. And I think that the MOU that we already came up with through many months gives a good framework for that RFP. If that's the way we go, again, I don't know what way the select board's going. So
When you say the RFPs have to all be on equal footing, are you saying that the RFP wouldn't include options where there's no building put back? I'm thinking
they
of
they could. I mean, so my issue becomes there's certain things in an RFP to put everybody on the same footing. And to avoid any problem. So say somebody came and wanted to put a higher end condo there, or affordable housing BOA wants to put it in again for affordable housing, and somebody wants to use it for something else. The same, to me, and what makes the most sense is an RFP, bring your proposals, but there's just some basic things in an RFP where everybody's going to be on the level playing field. We're going to want to know what your financial capability is, and there's going to be requirements around that. Things like that I think are important.
And the other part, if I can jump in, Julie, and the other thing is with the preservation aspect, I think, and Bob and Julie and anyone else who's been involved with the whole thing can jump in and give their thoughts. I think we're at the point where we don't want to keep doing this song and dance of here's someone who's saying they can do it, and then as we give them that option to do it, they say, oh, well, there's this bit of information we didn't tell you, so now we can't do the project. We kind of want that upfront notice of here's everything we can do, this is what it's going to take, and this is our information and expertise to show that we can do this.
My question is it likely or possible that there are going to be competing proposals and some have a building there at the end and some don't?
Well, I mean, I don't even know if that's the way they're going to go. But I mean, I'm envisioning, there could be competing proposals for things like that. But at least that weeds out, if you can't meet this financial criteria, if this is the amount of property that's going with it, this is, I mean, we're way far away from that. But I just threw that out there because I think that's one of the options. Again, I have no idea what the select board's going to do. That was new information to them. I think they've taken some time to digest it. I'm looking forward to seeing what their thoughts are next week. So
I don't think I've got my question said properly. Is it a criteria of whoever goes forward with this that they build a building on that site?
It's all going to depend on what the select board wants in the RFP.
Okay. All right.
So if the select board says, So if the select board says the RFP must say that a building has to be in there, has to be there. If you're tearing it down, a new building has to go up. Then, someone might put in a single family home, or they might put in an apartment building. They put in the building in general. If the select board says, here's the building, here's the district, this is what's allowed in the district, do whatever makes sense to you to show us you can do it. It's whatever the people then propose. It could be a new building on there, it could be a water slide drawing.
We aren't requiring that a new building be put there unless the select board decide that is what they want.
Right. We're not even there yet. They haven't even decided what they want to do with VOA.
So here's a question that I have, Julie. If it's not feasible to restore the building and the logical thing is to tear it down, what if the town took that on and tore the building down, got the grants and tore it down? And then we suddenly have a very valuable piece of property that could have many, many, many different uses. I mean, could we go down that road?
We could, and that's where like another, and then again, you would use the RFP process. We could just do that ourselves. Yes.
Because, I mean, in terms of, I think with the VOA, we were going to sell that property for $1 or some nominal amount of money. But maybe we could turn that into, from an EDC perspective, a real moneymaker for the town.
And that's another option. That's what I'm saying. We're in the very infant stages of reacting to this. And again, whatever we decide, as whatever the select board decides, in the end, it all has to go back, I think, before the voters.
Right. But it may be ironic in a way that tearing down the building really opens up a lot more doors for us.
It could. And I think at least part of the concerns expressed by some of the select board members at the last meeting were a lot of people voted to save the building. And that was a big thing for a lot of people. So I've had a few phone calls and people shared their thoughts, a couple of emails, they've shared their thoughts. So I think more information at the next meeting. I invited the VOA to at least attend virtually. We have a huge first part of our meeting devoted to budget committee and budget items with our EMS crisis for staffing. So that's first. So that could take anywhere from a half an hour to 45 minutes. Before then, there's only two. I'm trying to keep only 2 items on the agenda, and that would be the budget committee meeting with the select board, and then a discussion on 80 Greg.
And that's next Tuesday.
That's next Tuesday, yes.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Max, any other town issues or items?
The St. Carpa solar farm that I've been talking about a bit, because the state is now implementing LD 802, which is an act about decommissioning plans for solar farms. It was suggested that rather than the town having to verify and approve that plan, it instead goes to the DEP, which the state law requires. And that's just more so that we're not entangling in all these legal issues. Instead, it's just one unified language that the state has been taking care of for some time. They know what they're doing up there. So
it's not on our local planning board at that point?
Well, the planning board's already approved the project and it's
Okay.
already gone through the conditions. But one of the conditions was the approval of the decommissioning plan and bond, which now that this is happening, Julie and I kind of looked at each other and was like, do we really need to hire our attorney for this
Yeah.
when it's going to go to the state for approval? Just
Right.
made sense at the time.
Sounds good.
That's it.
All right, we're going to get back to you in a minute here, though. We may as well, I'm going to stay in the same order that we were last time. John, can you give us a update on what's going on with the pandemic?
Sure thing. What pandemic? No, I'm only kidding. You have to laugh or else you'd cry sometimes with this stuff. But there's some good news and some bad news this week. The good news is we had less positive cases this week and did less testing. The bad news is our positivity rate went up because we did less testing. So we've had 2 weeks in a row where we've dropped in cases. This week, I think it was 45 cases, the week before 53. So we're moving in the right direction, but
That's statewide cases?
no, this is Lincoln County cases.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Bad.
Maine still continues to be one of the highest states in terms of new cases in the country. Basically, it feels like the pandemic has worked its way across the country, if you will, and we've always been a little bit behind the others, if you will, in terms of this disease. And so, the challenge is, I think we all were perhaps overly optimistic before the Delta variant that we'd been through the worst of it. And 2 weeks of better numbers, still not great numbers, but better numbers, just with this particular pandemic doesn't really equate to a trend because things can change so quickly. We've had about 30% of the people who've been tested positive have been fully vaccinated. That's a much higher rate than most of the country. However, our vaccination rate is much higher than most of the country. So naturally, that's going to skew those numbers a little bit. Our hospital is still very, very full, and we have over 15 patients at this point waiting for placement. We call them swing patients. So they're waiting for placement in nursing care facilities or other facilities, and there's just no place for them to go. So the health system across Maine right now is in a bit of that gridlock, and we would love to move those folks out of the hospital into those beds. Part of the challenges that we're seeing with nursing care right now is staffing. So, I mean, at Lincoln Health, a good example is Cove's Edge has beds available. The problem is there's no staff, so we can't open those beds. And we're working really, really hard to hire people right now. We've got, talk about economic development. We've got some, entry-level jobs starting at $17 an hour. We've got CNAs starting at over $20 an hour. And free education for them if they so choose through our education classes. There's opportunities for folks who are looking for work and want to make a difference in their local communities. We would love to have some new people. We're also up against the state mandated vaccine law with COVID-19 for healthcare workers. That comes at the end of the month. And, at this point, we've been working the last month or so to really identify the people who would be leaving and try to plan for their departure in terms of getting the jobs posted as quickly as we could. And we are going to lose some people. We're going to lose some very good people. And while we're extremely sad to see them go, we have to respect their own personal choice. And it's just very difficult. And the team that is being left behind, if you will, or the team that's staying, is working their tails off, and they're doing a great job. But we've got to look out for them as well in the process. We're going to start a new incentive program to try to recruit more people that's internally to take some available shifts in elder care services, just so that we can keep that moving. But I think the bumpy road is here for a while, truthfully.
There's news stories about Alaska where they're triaging people, knowing if they're not sure they can save them, they're kind of leaving them out in the parking lot. Are we anywhere near that sad point yet?
Well, that's part of that is something called the crisis standard of care. And that's usually a decision that's made at a system level in terms of implementing that. My background in state government was part of the planning of when we would enact something like that and what the criteria would be. I don't believe that we're there now. I think people are still getting the appropriate care that they need. But, if somebody can be treated in the hospital and then recover at home where perhaps they may have typically recovered in the hospital, that certainly is an option because there's simply no space.
And you use the number 30% a few minutes ago. Were you saying that 30% of the cases are with people who have had all the vaccines?
Yeah, they're called breakthrough cases. And over the last 4 weeks or so, we've averaged about 30% in terms of breakthrough cases. And as I said, they're higher than in other places, but Maine, when compared to other states, has a fairly high vaccination rate. So it's not, it's a little bit skewed because there's, we've done a better job of vaccinating.
So, but on those breakthrough cases, what I've found comfort in is that you don't get nearly as sick if it's a breakthrough case on somebody who's been vaccinated. Can I still take comfort in that belief?
You absolutely can. The people who are in our higher levels of care in the main health system are typically people who aren't fully vaccinated. The people who are fully vaccinated will get sick, but they won't get as sick as some of the other folks will. And, the good news is in terms of contact tracing for a lot of our cases, it's not that difficult to see where they've come from. We know where they've been exposed. Sometimes it's a family member, and then 3 other family members test positive. Schools, of course, are a challenge with schools being back in. But, the other trend is we're seeing about a third of our cases are people under the age of 18. So some of those aren't eligible for the vaccine, obviously, at this point.
Right.
So,
Is there any pattern that has developed, and you don't hear about it on the news, on the television, but is there any pattern or data that would suggest that the 3 vaccines were equal or not equal in terms of the protection they afford?
well, I think the early indicators were that, J&J was the least effective, but was a one-shot deal. So people who were fearful of the needles and all of that type of stuff, a lot of them went for J&J. Early studies that I've seen, and I certainly wouldn't want to be quoted on this, have shown the Moderna vaccine to be most favorable, followed by Pfizer, and then followed by J&J. The booster doses, their studies are coming out now. I saw a study tonight on the news that Pfizer is showing that their vaccine becomes like 40% less effective if in a certain period in 8 months. So you need to get that booster shot. I think a lot of that research is evolving, truthfully. The bottom line is, as much as we respect everybody's personal decision, this is definitely a disease of the unvaccinated. There's absolutely no question about it. And if people can fight it in themselves to look at the data that exists and make a conscious decision based on true information, hopefully they'll see the importance of getting the vaccine.
Thank you, John. So that takes us to the, let's talk about EDA projects. And you had a nice write-up in the minutes, Max, in terms of, expanding sewer and water along Route 1 to the high school. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
So I will put up on, I'll do it on screen share. Try to have that first. So I did a bit of research on different possible spots based on what we discussed last meeting. I primarily looked at 2 different ones. One was near the industrial park, and then one was based on what everyone was saying, that there used to be this big push to try and expand sewer and water on Route 1.
Mm-hmm.
And for this industrial one, I spoke to John Fancy about that. For the one on Route 1, I talked with John again, but I also spoke with Gordon Webster Jr., who gave me some of the information that I have. And I'm not going to be able to put it up on the map, but I will certainly put the GIS map up so that people can see it on Zoom. So give me a moment. Hopefully you can see this. So speaking with John, I'm not going to get all the information, so I'm going to probably forget a bit or two. What John saw as a potential cost-saving measure to get sewer and water up there is to do a gravity pump, similar to what we have in the downtown, to connect that sewer system to our 235 plant. And what's fortunate, we've actually already talked about this. Town owns a parcel right here at the corner of Cross and 32, which is actually an ideal spot to put this. So we would put our remote satellite little pump station, whatever we're going to call it, right there. And then we have the sewer line, or, well, we'd have the sewer line obviously go through one pie road. I'm used to old pies at this point. So sewer would go here, and then we would have a regular sewer line going along Cross Street up until about here at the railroad line. Then we'd have a line that would go all the way down, gravity line, so no one would be able to connect to it. This is just strict, it's like a
Get from A to B.
A to B, it's a highway at this point.
And it is all downhill?
It's all
Enough downhill?
enough downhill. Enough down, well, and that's the other part of it. That's what the pump is gonna do. It's gonna mostly push it all the way down to Depot Street, where the sewer would then restart. The gravity would then go all the way down railroads, the railroad get to Depot, and then back into the normal system. So you wouldn't need to be doing any upgrades at that point.
So the option of tying into that, well, it's on the track, so I guess you can't tie into it anyway. But the option of tying into it before it goes to the railroad tracks, between the pump house and the railroad tracks, that's,
So if we were to do it, and John also suggested maybe expanding it down here into this little segment of, what's it called?
Winslow's Mill.
Winslow's Mills. It's there, and I'm blanking. But yeah, John was suggesting, if there's interest in this area, maybe expanding it here, which is an idea, or a little bit north as well, if there's interest. This area is consumed in wetlands, so I don't know what type of development would happen up there, or if there would be interest in it. Perhaps up and then around North Noble Road will also include this as well, but that's all details. It would mostly be this sort of triangle right here. It would mostly be focused on. And that's still fine. I think there was a rough price he gave me, 185 perhaps per foot is what we look at.
Where would the water run, Max?
So the water is already there. It's right here. So all we have to do is just get it. I mean, you'd be digging it up, and it's all by itself. But you dig up here to get the water along here, and then because you're already digging up the sewer on Cross Street to get to the railroad station, once the water gets to the railroad station, it just uses that already dug up area to replace the water line, and then same thing, you get the water all along this area that we're talking about.
do those pipes kind of hang under the bridge? How do they cross the river? Do you know?
That's a good question. We'd have to have an engineer sort of say what would need to be done.
Because you don't want them to freeze,
You don't want them to freeze. I'm dealing with that.
and you don't want them to get hit by a log next time the river comes up.
You don't want it to get hit by a log. You don't want it to freeze. That's actually what I'm dealing with in Vinyl Haven, one of their projects. They have an exposed pipe that they want to make sure is not going to freeze now. So they're doing an EDI just to help with that and other sewer and water.
So if there was future development down the road, literally down the road, I guess that would mean you would have another pump station to get it to that pump station.
Yes.
Okay, so you can keep branching out, but it just means it's not all going to be gravity.
Right.
Okay.
And, and John Fancy and I were mostly talking about just this triangle right here. Obviously, if, as George pointed out, if there is more expansion either north of here or even east of here, even a bit more south, we can always look into that. But we just need to know what exactly that's going to be, and we need that guarantee, because it is going to be a bit pricey getting the utilities to that area.
So in particular, the Atlantic Labs, North American Kelp, the other seaweed place would be on the pressure side of that pump. Does that mean they would not be able to gravity feed into it?
Being right here,
Yeah.
they would be along the pipe. They can actually get both utilities.
Even though they would be letting it go into a pipe that's under pressure? if the pump house is back at the corner,
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. It would still be fine for them to hook up to it, yes.
okay, there's probably some trick to get it into a pipe that's already got pressure.
Yeah, and we might have to talk, and that's the other thing the engineer would have to verify that all this is possible. Keep in mind, everything I'm saying about these suggestions, an engineer would have to confirm
Right.
that all this.
It's all hypothetical till we
All
get it.
hypothetical until we
Yeah.
actually put money down on it. Wink, wink. So, it might be, we have the pump station here and it's all fine. It might be this pump station's just to get this all the way over here. But you need to have another one here to push it all along the railroad.
Did the engineering folks that I was working with, did they ever reach out to John, do you know, or to you?
No, it might have gone to an old email of mine,
Ah, when your name was Patrick?
possibly, or when the town changed emails
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
All right, let me see if I can dig back into that.
I might reach out and just ask for a different name. But yeah, so that's one possibility. However, the thing I'll point out is that if we do an EDA project, they don't usually like it when a lot of work is done on private roads. So in this case, one Pie Road is privately owned. So if we do an EDA, it's pretty much doing everything up to one Pie Road, and then George would have to pay for the hookup. And that's for hookups in general as well. EDA likes to fund getting it along the road, but it's up to the private individual to pay for the actual hookup.
So if George were facing that question, he would need to know what the cost would be and if the likely flow from the business park is important to the numbers for the whole program, the whole project.
Right. And I think with that, it would be up to the town and George to talk about when the engineering report's done. Is it just one engineering report that focuses on just the sewer water expansion on the public areas? Or should this engineering report also include the industrial part to
Right.
see what that additional cost would be? Since we're already doing it, let's see how well it goes all the way.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion. Again, if it goes forward, it should be discussed amongst the select board, and the person we keep saying is George.
And
So the
Formerly known as-
limitation of this approach is essentially you're providing service only to the industrial park.
I'd say the industrial areas, because it is certainly the industrial park who would be a beneficiary, but is also Atlantic Labs over here and the people who are along the water here. Because that was the thing John Fancy sort of pointed out.
But when we talked about doing something like this at our last meeting, one of the things we thought of was, hey, here's a chance for somebody to add housing potentially,
And
a
actually,
subdivision potentially.
and I'll actually get to that bit. So that's why I say there was this talk about extending it a bit southward as well. Because in this area, if you're on sewer and water, then all of a sudden the lot size requirement drops down to 5,000 square feet. So you could obviously bring it down here and go as far down as you want. There's this big old area right here. That's where you get some housing. But and the other item that John Fancy kind of pointed out was what DEP likes to do and what some other groups like to do with some water expansion is when you're doing it along shoreline zones, they like that because that means the septics then have to phase out and then they're on some water. So that's always a positive for them. But I do acknowledge that to your point, this certainly does, this project would primarily be an industrial focused thing. And I wouldn't suggest that type of project unless we knew, well, first we'd have to know the amount. And I think it's still a good idea to have a study ready so that if there's ever a very good ideal time, you have it, you have everything you need. But I wouldn't pull the trigger on funding a multi-million-dollar project like this unless we knew there was a housing developer who would be going up there to put something in the Witzel's Mills corner, or if George or Atlantic Labs was planning a bigger expansion, they need that sewer and water. I wouldn't suggest funding that type of project unless I knew, at least, that something big was going on over there and it needs that sewer.
That there was a real need.
Yeah,
essentially.
like for example, if American Unagi said, hey, this is all working out great, and check this out, we have this partner who wants to do the exact same thing with the exact same need,
Yeah,
that would probably be something I would at least push for and say, hey, let's definitely get the sewer and water out there now, because they're gonna need probably a bit more than what's already there.
what's the build out at the industrial park, George? How much space do we have left?
All this, well, depending on what you find buildable, I mean, the topography gets a little rugged in places and it gets a little damp in places, but there's realistically probably another 20 or 30 acres of developable area,
What's that as a percentage?
Yeah.
a quarter.
25%?
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
So that's what I have for the
So,
industrial.
so one other quick question.
Yeah.
And I'm not I'm an engineer, but I'm not a sewer water guy. Is there any reason we just wouldn't go down Route 31 and be on 32 and connect houses in?
It's going to be a lot more expensive.
The railroad tracks was a cool idea.
Yeah, so pretty much the difference between, well,
Has anyone talked to the railroad, by the way, in preliminary terms?
Main DOT is who we speak to about that.
Have we?
Not yet, just because this is a very informal conversation we're having right now. And I can obviously talk to them about it any time. It's just a matter of actually getting it going.
Well, no, but the track, following the tracks becomes moot, I guess. If they categorically don't want a pipe full of water that might break and wash out their bedding, the tracks fall over.
That's why MDOT would want us to make sure we are hiring a very competent firm.
Right, but what I'm saying is, in spite of the fact that they had a water main basically following the tracks, if we had, it might be that as time has gone by, they've gotten more worried about that stuff.
Right.
Tracks failing and trains falling off.
Yeah, I can talk to MDOT about it. I just need better direction before I just bother them and say, hey, I'm thinking of this
I
project.
mean, the word hypothetically would be first, second, and third of your. Yep. Okay. I just hate to think that we would spend a lot of time thinking about it if they just flatly say, well, no, never would do that.
Well, in that case, we just have the gravity pump go along Depot Street or along
Right.
32 instead.
Right.
Now, to Jan's question about why can't we just do 32, that's because we'd be dealing with different pipes at that point, and we'd be dealing with a bigger topographical issue. I think part of the conversation I did have with John Fancy at least, was the gravity pipe would just be a lot less expensive, because we're dealing with roughly 2 miles of expanding utilities on 30. First of all, on a state road that's used quite a bit. And
It's shut down for a couple of months.
it'll be shut down for quite a bit.
Be worse than
Can't get to my camp.
worse than Thomaston.
Worse than Thomaston. And I mean, and price for expanding it has certainly gone up. Bill Napower's favorite saying was, miles sewer and water cost you $1 million. When he retired a few months ago, he said, now it's about $2 million.
Yeah.
So, that's a roughly $4 million projects for getting
Yeah.
sewer and water up to, and that's assuming we only get it up to One Pie Road and we don't have it cross street. Residents are gonna say, we're doing $4 million projects. What's the draw for? What's gonna pay for it all?
So To move us along here, you also looked into a parallel to Route 1 discussion?
Yes, that was the next. Did anyone have any quick questions before I quickly get to that one? Bob?
Yeah, I think the sell on this from an economic development point of view is going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
Unless the business park suddenly
As a big patron.
has a huge couple of opportunities and really
That,
demand
that,
that.
that we can't accommodate with our own approaches historically.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's the but-for question, it's a certain kind of, I mean, the eel operation has all their water figured out now.
Yep.
And like you said, if somebody tried to double it, it would probably change the whole deal. But everything else is going on there. We are accommodating with traditional septic systems.
I mean, one argument is that the sewer is value added for our whole system.
Right.
That increases their revenue take.
Yeah. They need the water. Yeah.
I just don't know what extent that increase is and whether or not it's going to increase the revenues of the utility district to the point where, wow, this makes a lot of sense.
So the only, and I'll be very quick on that. So in terms of the economic sense for pricing, that's why what I just talked about for having it go along the railroad, if that's possible, Maine DOT would have to prove that, is that John Fancy said it would be the cheaper option. You know, that would be the way Waldeboro could justify that type of price. I think I'd have to look at the exact number. I think it was 250,000 just for the pump station. And then I'd have to do the measurements, but I think it's about half the price if we did John Fancy's suggestion, if I had that number right.
I mean, I think, if we found out that the industrial park was at 25% capacity versus 75% capacity, I think you can make a stronger argument for moving forward. The challenge that I see is, what's the opportunity?
Right. And again, that's why I say I wouldn't suggest it. I certainly would be in favor of a study, of a feasibility study, getting an estimate and everything for when the opportunity arises. Because doing a study like this would be maybe 20,000. So if there was ever funding available, I would suggest that just so we have it in the back pocket. That's it. But by no means am I saying let's spend millions of dollars right now, because you're all right. Right now, unless we know there's a big developer who's looking for industrial space and they're willing to wait a few years for this to happen, there's not too much rush to get to this. So that's
Yeah, there is other land in that
I was just thinking,
neighborhood
that could
not currently industrially zoned.
right.
I'm thinking of the field on the other side of, it's got cows in it right now.
Yeah.
That's a great piece of real estate, belongs to the Reed folks.
And that might be the potential. Someone might buy and say, hey, I can do all this great stuff if you give me sewer and water, and that's the town discussion of it.
Yeah, that's a different one than the one we're having now, but it's a great piece of land.
So,
see, now a conversation like that changes the playing field.
right. But again, and that's why this one's probably a bit of a push to the side. And I'm going to move on to Route 1, and I'll be a bit faster on this because it looks like it's 10 to 8.
Okay.
So when I looked up the original plan from like 2 decades ago, the suggestion was to have something similar to what John Fancy suggested. So there would be a little satellite location right here. This is Allen's Blueberry Field. Right over here is Moose Crossing, just so everyone has an idea. So there would be a pump station here. And
Is that next to the railroad then?
this is the CMP line.
Oh, okay. That's the right of way for CMP, the high wire.
Yep. So the idea was to put a satellite station here, and the gravity pump would go through the CMP line.
Cool.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
This was all envisioned when apparently I guess it was a grocery store was planning on going there. That fell through for whatever reason, and so the plans were scrapped. But I think the suggestion was to have the pump here and then a sewer line that would go all throughout these back properties, if I'm looking at this map right, which EDA wouldn't fund that. No federal agency would fund that because it's going through all this private property. They like it being on public right of ways. So.
But the individual landowners could finance that part of it themselves?
They can. So EDA would just be funding the satellite pump station and the gravity pump to that spot.
But let's say I owned one of these parcels and I wanted to build 10 houses. And I wanted them all to be on sewer and water.
So they could have 5,000
I could-
square lots.
What's that?
You can have small lots if it's,
Right,
yeah.
I could pay to have that sewer and water brought into my subdivision.
Yep, private, it's private sewer lines, so that's certainly possible.
And we need a bunch of 5,000 square foot home, parcels with homes on them.
That's all fair. So this was the main suggestion.
Put your pointer on the school. That's the school right there.
This is the school.
Yeah.
And this is Blueberry / Moose Crossing right over there.
So we can literally go all the way to, what road's that? To,
Town.
This is a 235. This is Manktown.
yeah,
So I think if the idea is to get sewer and water to Manktown / the high school, you don't even need to look here. You would just have to make sure CMP is fine with it, but find a spot somewhere over here to have the pump station.
Yep.
And then have the gravity line fed through CMP's line right there.
Could it be a pump that pushes instead of pulls or vice versa?
At least so, yeah.
So it could be at either end of the line, as long as you had enough oomph in the pump to make it go or to pull it towards you.
Pumps are better at pushing than pulling.
They are.
So-
And that's the one that would be up at the industrial park.
Yeah.
It would be a pusher.
so is the school higher or lower than,
It's high. This is
Yeah,
the CMP line.
it's-
This is the school.
Well, it would be, if you had a pushing pump at the school,
you could push
it
it
would-
back?
potentially go all the way down the CMP typically welcome buried
That's
pipes.
a good question. Because
I know
keep
they,
in mind, this was all something that was thought up of.
I didn't know you had a mustache.
It's been a while since you've seen my face. It's been 2 decades since they came.
You
up
should
with
see
it.
Bob's beard.
It's been 2 decades since they had this plan put together. So I don't know what CMP would say on this map.
Yeah.
You keep in mind, for both projects I'm talking about, we definitely need to get someone else to say, yes, you can have a gravity feed go through this long piece of property.
That's the sewer. What about the water? The water, you'd have to,
We'd have to, it would have to be like at the top of the hill where we'd have to find a fresh new source somewhere near that area and create its own little water system there. That wouldn't be part of the actual town system.
Oh, easier to create a new water source.
Well, yeah, because the closest water source to get to the school is down here at Old Route 1 Main Street intersection. That's how far it goes. So that's that's a bit down there. Now,
Well, wait a minute, what does the school have for a water source right now?
it's got to have a well or two.
So would that be able to service the area?
I'd have to, you'd have to see how much their well does support, because you don't want to have bigger commercial aspects using that same well, because then what happens when that new big commercial business uses just as much water as what the school needs right now?
Well, you keep drilling more wells, which is not insane. People do that.
No, that's fair, but again, that's why a feasibility study would be needed to see, oh, yeah, it could do it.
Well, I mean, the school could have a 100-gallon-a-minute well under there. We don't know.
We don't know. And that's the other part. It's the school that then has to say, yeah, we're gonna give you a well to do your crazy thing.
Well, if it meant the soccer field wasn't soppy every time it rained because it's got a leach field under it, it might be nice. I think that's still an issue. Some of those sports fields.
I think the school would be pretty excited to have a sewer line brought up there, I
Right.
think.
But for EDA or the federal funding sources we need to get this, well, I'm gonna say EDA primarily because they're the ones who would fund a good chunk of this. it's gotta be a jobs focused thing. How is this gonna create new jobs? How is this gonna save some jobs? So there's potential when it comes to talking about the school, because if the school says, we're gonna have to move because of all these septic issues, that's an argument we can make, saying, the school gives this many jobs to the town, and if they move, that could result in lost jobs. That's a bit of a shaky. I see Jen's hands raised. I'll get to right after my thought, but that's a bit of a shaky thing to be on. But if, like with George, like when we were talking about the industrial park, if George said, "Oh, there's this big business that's coming in. If we can get sewer and water there, then that's a thing EDA would jump on." So we would need to have a big jobs focus of, and it can't be some indirect thing of, "Oh, well, schools create people who are ready for the workforce." It's, oh no, once this building is done, once this project's done, you're going to see X number of jobs like next year. Jen, I saw your hand up. What's up?
Okay, so you remember how the zoning out here along Route 1 is commercial a half mile in either direction from the center of Route 1? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this could, with sewer only actually, but coming through here, this could change some of the potential use for some of these properties. And we might consider that I'm just thinking,
Right.
If it was mixed use in some areas as opposed to just commercial, then it might open up an area that could be more vibrant, especially near the school here. What do you think, Max?
It's certainly a possibility. Like all these are possible ideas we can have. I'm just trying to also emphasize the funding is the big hiccup that we have.
Right. Well, I'm thinking too. So a lot of our property on Route 1 that is undeveloped so far has been for sale for as long as since I moved back home to Maine in 2004, actually since 2002, since I have been up here. And it is hard to sell the property because there's not a lot of infrastructure that comes in for commercial entities. Right. So how is it that we might use an opportunity like this to create an asset, an infrastructure asset that would attract that attention to properties that are available for development?
So the idea of this would be to make it feasible for somebody on Route 1 to connect to sewer, even if it's back at the power lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you're a half mile.
Yeah. So that's a cool idea.
I think it is a cool idea. And eventually, maybe we're talking, eventually, 10 years from now or whatever. When our concern about workforce housing, our concern about being able to grow both in commercial and residential, it could open this up, this whole area on either side of the CMP thing. I'm not sure how that happens, but it could change the use for these properties, and it could make the properties more valuable.
Well,
interesting.
The one thing I have to point out with the gravity line that I talked about for both proposals, you wouldn't be able to hook up to the gravity line. You'd have to get the normal sewer pipe to be going around there, which is whatever extent we're going to have to make it. And again, I don't know how much we would be doing at this.
I should, but I have no idea how you get sewer into a pipe that's got sewer flowing by. Is it check valves or somebody should come and whisper in our ears how do you connect to a sewer line that's going by your house? They do it all the time. I just have no idea how you do it.
If you have greater pressure on your pipe than on the other pipe, you will push into it.
Right. So that means below on your drain. I mean,
You have to pump it in somehow.
but nobody pumps against sewer lines, do they? Maybe they do.
Well, it's
I don't know how it all works.
I don't either, and wish I did. But yeah, I mean, yeah, pressure
It's
is,
like water flow, right? Like it's the angle of the entry into the pipe. Water is not going to flow backwards.
Right.
So if the sewer is flowing north and your pipe is south to north connecting, it's not going to back up. It's going to flow in. As long as you got head. in
yeah,
your-
but that's the trick there, is because you're going up and downhill on Route 1.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
Save this for our field trip to the utility district.
yes,
So, okay, so just so I understand, so if we want to be able to connect,
We'd have to know what, first of all, I think the big problem I saw with what was done back in the 2001 Route 1 thing that we're talking about is the initial plan was a pump station would be here, and then the actual sewer line was spread out throughout all these different properties with different property owners paying for their expansions, I assume, and a gravity line going here. So there was no well-defined overall area the town would be paying for this expansion. So I think that's the first step that would have to be done with here. The pump station's there. Where is the rest of the actual sewer going to, not the gravity pump?
can the sewer pipe itself be in segments of gravity feed and connectability? Like, can you have a mile that you can't connect into and then a
Right.
mile that you can connect into?
there's got to be a way to do that.
There's probably a
It has
way
to
to
be.
Because then you can actually identify potential
spot.
connections points.
It's a possibility. Again, you're asking someone who doesn't know everything about it, so it's probably something I'd have to ask John Fancy, or Gordon Webster Jr., so. Certainly a possibility, so.
Hmm.
Now, the other possibility is, because the sewer line, yeah, about 5 minutes after, so I'll be quick. So, in looking at the town, I also just looked at where the sewer ends, seeing what potential there is there. We have one sewer line that ends around here at Raymond Road or 32 South. To extend it, there's really no purpose at this point. It's mostly residential. It's already primarily developed. You're not going to get too many interested parties
And
involved.
there's a great big hill you have to go up with a church on top.
It's a great big hill you have to go over, so I don't see too much need at that area.
If you're going to do it there, it's more ecological. It's getting
yeah,
houses that have gray water going into the water, going into the.
Yeah.
it's not, well, I'd say it's not even that, because similar to Green Road, similar to 32 on 220, because the sewer ends here at the Sylvania site.
Yeah.
You know, if you were to extend it, you know, they're all spaghetti lots. Some people have a house right next to the road and have, you know, their septic right next to it, so there's no real big threat going to the water.
Okay.
Same thing with Friendship, extending the sewer and water down this way, it's more for residential purposes, no big economic issue. You might have an excuse to have it on Sylvania, but we need to purpose for Sylvania first, so I'm not.
It already reaches Sylvania,
It
doesn't
already
it?
reaches Sylvania, but doesn't. It
So you're saying go down into the property?
go into Sylvania.
Yeah.
And then, let's see. This area, I mean, going up West Main or Atlantic Highway for the water is a very tough issue to do. And then because of the hills. So it's gonna be hard to justify pumping all the water up here. When again, it's a rather empty area. There's a few lots you do have some potential on, but nothing really jumps out, right, for a good developable lot. Well, lots. There's one or two that would be good, but nothing that would scream you can get multiple projects going on.
Where do we stop now with water and sewer?
On Route 1, it's about here at the Family Dollar,
Oh, wow.
and then on West Main Street, about here at the offices. It's about here.
So when Julie does her community center, we're gonna need to expand at that time anyway, right?
Yes, sewer and water will have to be expanded either for Route 1, Kaler's Corner, or Main Street. That's happening. I see your application. That's up. So that's what will be done. And that's the end of this one. And then Depot Street, as I said, utilities end about right there at, well, the sewer ends at the railroad. The water goes all the way up to Cross Street. But again, there's not, if you were to do the sewer expansion here, as you pointed out, it'd be more ecological reasons, nothing for commercial.
Yeah.
Now, there is potential to expand sewer naturally up this way and see what happens with, say, this lot. That's a rather large one, and then if they allow us to cut through, that'd be a game changer, I'd say. But nothing else really going on here. A lot of these areas where the sewer and water ends is just, if you go any further, it's more residential or ecological. Nothing too economic focused, and that's the big fault I see.
So everything I've heard tells me that we need to find an end user in a way
Yeah.
to justify these kinds of projects. It's not a build it and they shall come solution.
Right,
It's a build it and we got this guy that's here solution.
Unless
unless,
you can create a need or identify a need for sewer to the school.
Oh, okay.
right,
Because
There is a-
then you
yeah.
have new potential that.
Then you got
someone else
both.
could ride on to.
You got to build it and they shall come, plus you got a real solution at the end of the road. Yeah. I like that.
The school has always, as in my history of understanding it, has always wished it had sewers
Right, okay.
for, on a couple levels.
And you were on the board for a while too.
Yeah.
so that's all I have for all of these. I'm,
So Max, the preliminary thing is to find out if CMP is receptive and if the railway is receptive
To the hypotheticals we.
to the hypotheticals.
so a preliminary engineering report would be, one, checking with those two and saying, and seeing if one of them would be fine with it. But actual payment for an engineer would be seeing if, all right, you have the permission to do it. Does it actually feasibly make sense to do this? Like, it costs this much to get this all here, and you can do it because you're gonna do this and that, this and that. And so,
I don't know this, but my guess would be like the CMP. I wouldn't be surprised if in the first 3 pages of their regulations, it said, oh yeah, but don't ever think of burying a sewer line here. And if it does, then we'd find out with or without an engineering report. Similarly, I don't think the DOT or the railroad, I don't think their reaction to having a pipe running along their tracks is going to hinge on an engineering report. I think it's going to hinge on a policy that they have.
I think if it were a gas line, it would be something very different from running a sewer line or a water line though.
Gas line being better or worse?
No, worse.
well, I
That's-
think
yeah.
it also depends on how large of a right of way they have. Because if they have a large enough right of way so they can get out the water line next to it, but not under it, they'd probably be a bit more open.
Yeah. When you start doing that though, you're following the terrain instead of the level tracks.
Right.
As far as gravity, and
But that's
gravity works both ways, uphill and downhill.
just the whole.
And CMP would be interesting because I don't know if there's an EMF issue or
No, yeah,
running pipe underneath the transmission line.
interesting
There
question.
may well be.
But no, that's what I have for all of this. I'm still gonna do a bit more research on my end, see if there's a very good possibility, and if I find one that I'm probably gonna go to the select board and ask for money if we're trying to rush to have a project done by March when this deadline is done. But if I can't find something in time, it's fine. EDAs are still year round. It's just we wouldn't be getting a bigger chunk of the pie.
Do you need us to make a motion to have you do that or?
No, I think you did it last meeting that you wanted me to just
Yep.
do it.
So
and
keep doing what you're doing.
keep doing what I'm doing.
All right, good. Any other business?
Move to adjourn?
Second?
What a
All
team.
right.